Oh, hello out there. They say to always give this a few seconds, but hello and welcome to another fun filled edition of Adam's Music Box. It is that time that everyone has been waiting for. People have thought a lot about it, they've thought a lot about it, they have argued a lot about it, but it is finally here. The annual weekly Saturday stream is here, so worry no more. But there is another event happening in a few days that has got a lot of people talking about a lot of things and thinking about a lot of things and voting for, well, one thing or the other. And that is the fact that on Tuesday, we'll potentially know who the next president of the USA is going to be. This being a music show, I wanted to talk about musical endorsements of presidential candidates over the years, how it works, what it means, and we'll just try to have a little bit of fun with it. So let's get the boring parts out of the way early. Never say that on a live feed, but there you go. Why would a musician endorse a politician? Because, as Jan Van Halen told his sons Eddie and Alex, you never want to do anything to alienate around 50% of your audience. And that's probably why a lot of musicians don't make these endorsements, because in any given, concert venue, let's say roughly half are going to be right wing Republicans and the other half will be left wing Democrats and, centrists mixed in there. But, you want everyone to come to your show for both business reasons and, I suppose, for artistic reasons as well. But there are other motivations. Let's start with the least common of the motivations, and this is genuine, sincere feelings about someone's policies, their credibility, etc. Then there's the fact that everything in the world of business, including the music business, is a big club, and people want to be in it. Presidential campaigns are big business. If you endorse or perform for a presidential candidate, you'll have access to a lot of phone numbers and email addresses of people at record labels, people at big tech companies, think the streaming companies. They'll have access to the best lawyers. They'll have access to people in other areas of the media, potential investment partners, other artists that you might want to do something with to, raise your profile. And I'm not passing judgment on it. That's the way the world works. What makes the world go round? Money and Rolodexes, contacts. And so that's another reason that a lot of these things happen. I would say that the further back you go with these endorsements, the more it's about genuine feeling, and the more we get into today, the more it's about people wanting to network. And that, again, is just the way the world works. So, without further ado, let's look at the first major presidential campaign where these artistic endorsements really tended to matter, and that was in 1960. Now, the reason that it tended to matter is one of the candidates, the man who eventually was victorious, was one of the youngest men to ever successfully become the president of America. And this was, of course, JFK. Now, JFK was very much beloved by a lot of entertainers because he was young, he was hip, he was cool. Frank Sinatra was a huge backer of his campaign. And there were loads of other celebrities that were very much involved in the JFK campaign as well. Harry Belafonte was involved. Now, Harry Belafonte has always been quite political because he was a civil rights activist for much of his professional life. He spoke eloquently and frequently on the topic, and he made it clear that in his view, JFK was going to be a good leader on civil rights. And so I think that was definitely a genuine endorsement there. Sinatra became very good friends with Kennedy, even though there was the incident when Kennedy went to Palm Springs where he stayed at Bing Crosby's house rather than Frank Sinatra's house, and that was a bit of a scandal at the time, but obviously much more important and sad things happened not so long after that. There were others. Judy Garland was someone who was very much enthusiastic about Kennedy. Peter, Paul, and Mary performed with Kennedy. Leonard Bernstein, the composer and the conductor of the New York Philharmonic, was very much for Kennedy, as was Ella Fitzgerald. And there were many more. Kennedy really did get all of the big people on his side. And his brother Robert, when he ran in 1968, Harry Belafonte was a big part of that campaign. The folk singer Pete Seeger was tied to Kennedy, though not formally an endorsement. Jon Stewart, not the comedian, but the man from the Kingston Trio, was a big supporter of RFK. Leonard Bernstein again involved himself in that campaign. Of course, he died. Sadly, he was killed before the campaign ended, and the Democratic nominee became Hubert Humphrey. Now, Hubert Humphrey was an interesting one because one of my favorite bands was very much supportive of him, Tommy James and the Shondells. Hubert Humphrey wasn't the most charismatic type of person, but he did write the liner notes for the Crimson and Clover album that Tommy James and the Shondells put out. That was quite cool. Nixon in 68, less popular among musicians and the artistic community, but Nixon won. And in 1972, on the when he was on the verge of a historic landslide, he got an endorsement from James Brown. James Brown is in hi, because he felt good endorsing Nixon. We're going to be here all week, folks. And that was somewhat controversial in some quarters because it was in the 60s, really, that there tended to be a shift. From the 1870s up till the 1960s, the majority of Black Americans voted for the Republican Party. And this tended to shift, though, beginning in 1960 with JFK's election. But the shift did, I mean, no shifts happen overnight. And so it wasn't as strange to see someone who was very much someone who sung about civil rights and sung about Black pride to endorse the Republican Nixon, but some did find it controversial. Of course, in office, Nixon appointed Elvis Presley. He gave him an honorary DEA role to go after people who use drugs, even though Elvis himself was addicted to pills. I would say through no fault of his own, but that was a funny thing that happened then. Another Nixon endorsee from the music world was Ray Conniff, a really, really great arranger for sort of easy listening choral music. He got his start with Mitch Miller before forming the Ray Conniff Singers, and they put out a lot of really well selling, easy listening albums in the 50s, 60s, and by the 70s, they were a bit out of fashion, but he kept putting the albums out. By that time, you'd hear them on some AM stations and grocery stores and things like that. But he supported Nixon, as did Lawrence Welk, everybody's favorite easy listening Polish conductor. So there you go. And then came Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter had some interesting endorsements too. The Allman Brothers Band were very much followers and endorsers of Jimmy Carter. They were both from the South. And of course, there was Johnny Cash, because he married June Carter, who was a distant relation to Jimmy Carter. So Johnny Cash was very much a supporter of Jimmy Carter in that election. Now, 1980 was an election where you could be forgiven for thinking there was a bit of deja vu, because a lot of the musicians, not all, but a lot of the musicians who played a huge part in raising awareness and raising funds for JFK became big supporters of Ronald Reagan. And that really shouldn't be surprising. Ronald Reagan was from the entertainment industry. He was an actor. He was the president of the Screen Actors Guild. As the governor of the state where most entertainment businesses are based, California, he got to know all of these people. I mean, he already knew them, but Sinatra had become a fan of his as governor, and Sinatra was in many ways his biggest celebrity endorser, along with John Wayne. Dean Martin followed his good buddy Sinatra onto the Reagan train, as did their mutual friend Sammy Davis Jr., all of whom endorsed Reagan and performed for Reagan. And it was in many ways sort of the final hurrah of that era of classic pop, because a lot of those vocalists tended to sadly die in the 90s and early 2000s. Sammy Davis sadly didn't make it out of the 80s. Dean Martin and Sinatra both died in the 90s, but they had their good times with Ronald Reagan, and he really sort of locked up those celebrity endorsements. Others very much endorsed anyone that Reagan was running against, including Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa did not like Ronald Reagan at all and made many songs and even a music video expressing those views. Prince, I don't know if he was a fan or not, probably not. He did the song Ronnie Talk to Russia. And maybe Ronald Reagan was a Prince fan because Ronnie did talk to Russia. So who knows? I don't think he was a Prince fan, though. There's also the funny moment where he, or one of the people he had working from, because I think he was pretty old. I don't think he knew who Bruce Springsteen was, but someone mentioned the song Born in the USA, and he misconstrued the lyrics, thinking that it was like a rah nationalistic song, where it was about the ill treatment of Vietnam veterans. So a bit of a misunderstanding there. Now, the 1988 election, the most interesting musical thing there was Frank Zappa's Broadway the Hard Way, an album which satirized the election and did so amazingly. So if you want to hear about that election, don't listen to me, buy that album or stream it. And then comes 1992 and Bill Clinton. Now, Bill Clinton, again, not as young as Kennedy, but a relatively young guy. Bruce Springsteen, his name came up again. He endorsed Bill Clinton. So did John Bon Jovi. James Taylor endorsed Clinton. Paul Simon endorsed Clinton. Members of the band endorsed Clinton. And so a lot of people in the entertainment industry were big on Clinton, not so big on his opponents. The 2000 election was really boring. I'm just going to skip it. It was just too boring for words. But then, and the same with 2004, frankly. But then we get to 2008, and it gets interesting again because you have what I think really begins a trend of a very lopsided endorsement system in politics, where a lot of the biggest celebrities tend to go to the Democratic candidate. Now, in 2008, it probably wasn't so coincidental because, again, you have someone on the Democrat side who was young and charismatic. That was Barack Obama, and he had basically all of the major celebrities. So let's take things forward, and that was true in 2012 as well. So let's take things forward to today, because for the third election in a row, you have Donald Trump, and we have the appearance of someone that most people didn't know too much about in Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. And I've made a short list of the people who have either formally endorsed one side or the other, or who have talked about it. So let's see who Harris's endorsees are. Well, Cardi B just spoke at a Harris event. John Legend has endorsed Harris. Ariana Grande has endorsed Harris. Beyonce has spoken at Harris events. Jennifer Lopez just spoke at a Harris event. And the mother of them all, the biggest celebrity, arguably in the world, has endorsed Kamala Harris, and that is Taylor Swift. Now let's look at the celebrities who have endorsed Donald Trump. Well, there's Ted Nugent, who's a huge supporter of Trump. Ted Nugent was a Republican long before Trump, unlike some who have come into the party. So he's obviously very much pro-Trump, and he talks about it. He has a podcast, very vocal about that. Kid Rock is a friend of Donald Trump's and a big endorser. He performed at the Republican National Convention and all that jazz. And so we've got to put him on the list. Little Pump has been a long time, well, since 2020, he's been a long time endorser of Donald Trump. Sexy Red is reportedly pro Trump. Kodak Black has a close relationship with Donald Trump. 50 Cent has, even since 2020, been a very strong supporter of Donald Trump. I think he joked once that if Biden or Harris, well, he was talking about Biden because it was when Biden was in, and now he's not. But you know what I mean. That 50 Cent would be 27 cents. So he likes Trump's economic policies, obviously. He's even let Trump use his song Many Men, Wish Death Upon Me, from his hit album Get Rich or Die Tryin'. And that has sort of become an anthem of Trump since someone sadly tried to kill him in July. And so 50 Cent has really associated his music with that. Let's see who else is on this list. Maya, M-I-A. She's a female hip hop artist. She was backing Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but now that Kennedy backs Trump, she has endorsed Trump. Who else did I write down? Azalea Banks has talked about Donald Trump. Lil Wayne, the rapper, has also talked about Donald Trump. And although not an official endorsement, the paparazzi at an airport in Las Vegas, Ostier, formerly known as Kanye West, who he is endorsing, and he also said Donald Trump. So let's look at what all of this means. And I think that there are a few trends that tend to emerge. Noticeably absent are a lot of the boomers. Some, like Bruce Springsteen and John Bon Jovi, have, as they have endorsed Democrats for most of the last few elections, they've endorsed Harris. But a lot of her main supporters are either what the young peoples, the Gen Z type of people, or the people who are sort of Gen Z adjacent. Whereas the Trump supporters tend to be more of the Gen X generation, with some millennials scooped in. So some would say that that correlates to polling, that young people tend to vote more, or will tend to vote more for Harris, whereas you get older, they tend to get more for Trump. Don't necessarily believe it till things are over, but that's just what some of the information seems to indicate, and that does seem somewhat indicative of the musical endorsements. It does seem that while there's a good mix of male and females on both sides, that the people endorsing Trump tend to lean more male, and the people that are endorsing Harris tend to lean more female. Again, there's some information that indicates that females are more likely to vote for Harris, where males are more likely to vote for Trump. So we're kind of seeing trends in the musical endorsements that mirror this. And again, with Trump, they both have their share of boomers, even though they're not quite as front and center as the Gen Z and millennials are for Harris, and as some of the older millennials and the Gen Xers are for Trump. But obviously, on the outliers, you have Ted Nugent, obviously a boomer on the Trump side, and you have people like John Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen, boomers on the Harris side. So, it's interesting to see how times have changed. And it's interesting too to see people that have crossed over from one side to another. I would say, and by that I mean, because we always hear the term crossover artist in terms of genres, but I suppose now we can use that term crossover artist to denote someone's political leanings changing. And I would say that the most famous person who changed political leanings over the course of his career was Frank Sinatra, a Democrat who was strongly associated with the Kennedys, and then he became a Republican strongly associated with Ronald Reagan. And he backed a winner both times because Kennedy won and Reagan won. So I guess the chairman of the board really does know what's going on. There have been some celebrities lately who have tended to sort of be associated with Democrat politics more in the past, who have now gone over to Trump. Some of those have been in the music industry. Others have just been generally in the entertainment industry. It seems like Joe Rogan is pretty friendly to Trump. Rogan had previously endorsed Kennedy, well, Robert Kennedy Jr. I don't know, was Rogan around in 1968? He's definitely a Gen Xer, but it looks like he's there, and his friend Dana White is very much for Trump. So again, we kind of see in the music world trends that parallel other things. Look at it from a regional perspective, too. Jimmy Carter was a president from Georgia. He was from the South, and so he had people like Johnny Cash and the Allman Brothers support him. So you could look at it from a geographical perspective. With Reagan, obviously, the music industry is somewhat of a physically transient industry, but Reagan got a lot of support from a lot of the sort of mainstay old school, let's call them celebrities of his day, because he knew them, because he was a celebrity president living in a celebrity part of the world. And so that, I think, makes sense as well. These trends come a bit apart with Bill Clinton. He was from Arkansas, but he got a lot of major celebrities supported. So there, I think you could say the youth factor, because Clinton was relatively youthful. He ate cheeseburgers. I mean, you can be any age and eat a cheeseburger, but he was contrasted with his opponent, who was a bit more buttoned down, even though his opponent did not like broccoli. So I guess both of them, in their own way, contributed to people not eating quite as healthy as they ought to be, says Joe Rogan. So then there's that. There's Obama, who's from Chicago. And obviously, he was aware of the musical influences from that city, but he was also obviously America's first black president. And a lot of black entertainers found that to be a very important historic moment. Stevie Wonder performed very famously on stage at the White House with Obama, and all of the sort of mainstays of both what was then in 2008 contemporary black culture and the black artists from decades before tended to rally around Obama. Now, in 2016, it was a bit different than in 2024, because something has happened with the sociological zeitgeist, say that three times fast, in terms of perceptions of Trump. It's something I like to call Trump normalization. In 2016, the people who liked Trump liked him because he was a first time political candidate. Well, he tried in 2000 for a bit to run for the Reform Party, but it was his first serious run. He was a political outsider. He was from the world of business and the world of celebrity, because we cannot forget that even though Reagan was a professional actor from day one and Trump was in business from day one, he became an entertainer. He became a television host. He became someone very well known for his cameos in various things and for selling various items, usually his own, as a brand spokesperson. But he was an outsider, and a lot of people found the people that loved that about him thought that that was a quality. The people who didn't like him thought that that was a detriment. And as a result, a lot of celebrities who played political and middle of the road, they went with the candidate they thought was the safer choice, the one that most people thought was going to win, the person with the political experience, and Hillary Clinton. She lost, Trump won. We all know what happened there. And since I would say the last few years, we're seeing a kind of sea change, this normalization of Trump, where he's no longer an outsider in a specific and empirical sense because he was the president. You can't get much more inside than that. So one could say, and some do, that he's still an ideological outsider and that the trajectory of his life was as a political outsider. You could say that is accurate, but he was the president. And I think that has played a role in sort of the perception. We're not talking about reality, we're talking about perception, we're talking about entertainment, that perception of Trump as being more normalized. And what that means is that we're seeing a much more evenly balanced set of endorsements than we did in 2016 or even in 2020, because now we're seeing two people who are people that were on the inside of the White House, Harris as the vice president, Trump as the former president. And so we're not seeing that sort of, the seesaw that was tipped very much in favor of one candidate in 2016 in terms of the musical and, frankly, other celebrity endorsements. Um, I need to make, there's some sound buzzing and I need to make that stop. Um, do other people just turn their phones off when they're doing this? I don't know. Mm. I don't know, vote for me and I'll figure it out. Anyway, so yeah, as I was saying, we're definitely seeing more of a balance there. And I think that's very interesting. And maybe that is an overall reflection of the overall zeitgeist. And I think that it kind of is that as politics reflects a certain equilibrium, we see more of an equilibrium in the celebrity endorsements. When it reflects something more polarizing, allegedly, we see something different. When we see youth juxtaposed with age, we see it a certain way. When we see certain racial groups juxtaposed, we see it in a certain way. So to recap, all of these various metrics, all of these various factors can determine the weight of celebrity endorsements: age, sex, race, geographical orientation, youth, vibe, experience. And whether this is a reflection of the vote, we will have to see. It's an interesting thing to consider anyway. Now, I'm sure I've forgotten some of the artists that have endorsed some of the candidates because it is a relatively long list, and I don't want to let anyone feel left out, but I'll leave you with this. I've never let the politics of any artist get in my way of enjoying them. There's two genres of music: there's good music and there's bad music. And if it's good music, I don't care if you're left, right, center. I don't care if you agree with me, disagree with me, or any of the other things. If it's a good tune, then it's a good tune. And I think that at times it's helpful to remember that, because elections come, well, presidential elections in the US come every 4 years, but the songs that you love, you can listen to every single day. So we can think about that, or you could always go for the artists who remain steadfastly apolitical because, like I said, they don't want to run that risk of alienating 15% of the audience. I get that completely. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel. It's relatively new, but it is growing. You can now buy memberships. Just click the little join icon, and we can have little private fireside chats. You can ask me what I really think, or we can just talk about normal stuff. Ooh, scary. You can also send super chats, and as we gain some more momentum, we can do that. Unlike others, I don't know how the algorithm on this platform works. I don't pretend that I do. But let's just try to keep everything going so that we can continue and so that the music can live on. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.